I find this, not surprising, but still as a phenomena, I find it fascinating that the new status symbol for financially elite people is to disconnect from information for a month. No cell phones, no radio, no television, no engagement whatsoever for any informational source for a month. That's the new status symbol. Why do you think that is? Do you think it's just fucking far lefty ridiculousness, woke shit? No, they're connected more than anybody, right? It's like they've got their finger on the pulse of what everybody says at any given moment. No, it's that it clouds your mind, it clouds your judgment. It's like, try to think of a thought, but have 20 people that you even know. So there's no, look, set up this experiment. I guarantee you will not pass, right? Here's the deal. Take 10 of your best friends. You know that you're absolutely safe with them, no matter what. You try to think of a single idea while they're poking you with their fingers, tapping your legs with their feet, and asking you questions and talking to you about random shit in your day. Nothing offensive, nothing, detrimental to you, but try to just keep your focus on what you're doing when these voices that you recognize and understand, are asking you questions and giving you, conversing with you or trying to converse with you, and and they won't let it up. Try to do that for 60 seconds. It's impossible. It's impossible. It's like it's just something that you can't do. You'd have to literally be a Buddha to do that. So so that's the thing. And fortunately or unfortunately, only the elite have the time, because of their resources, to understand that and look at it, acknowledge the, what has been said about that scientifically, and to look around. We don't need the science to show us that we're a fucking distracted nation. We're a distracted society. And everybody who is distracting us is taking us out of the loop of our lives, in a big way. Right? It's like most 95% of what you're getting is just bullshit that has no bearing on you for the next thing that you're going to do in your life. None. 2% maybe, has some bearing directly on you, or the society,
Yeah, it's actually interesting because that you kind of started to talk in that direction, because I had a dream about that last night. It was like this guy was getting into a car, and when he got into it was like a fancy car in a city, and when he got into the car, the first thing that the like taxi driver or limo driver or whatever asked him was like, what is your social number? And the guy, it was like a 1 through 5 system or something, and he had to, like, it was like a single digit. He had to like give his no. So it's like, we'll take you to this address that you've asked us to take you to, like, only if you're high enough on the social hierarchy or whatever. And I was like, wow, that's really,
so it's like a caste system.
yeah. And I was like, that's kind of,
Yeah.
because I was asking about, what if we did a podcast today, like what we should talk about, or what would be a poignant issue or whatever. And I thought about that in terms of, and I was thinking, I don't know if I was thinking about it in these terms, but also like I was thinking like, oh, well, if a lot of people, if we are subconsciously feeling like that in some way, like that there is this kind of like social elite, and that like everybody's kind of trapped in this certain place, and it all has to do so much with like maybe what we focus on every day. Like my question for you, I was gonna ask you like, oh, well, how do you control your focus, and like, what do you choose to focus on so that you don't get caught in that loop of distraction and like,
Sure.
whatever.
For me, it's like, I mean, I go back to, and it could be age, I mean, I grew up in a different time, right? So it's like, uh, and some of the old tech still works, right? It's like, make a goddamn list, you know, settle what like, okay, here's how I do it. I settle the first thing, the night before how I want my day to go. So there's the esoteric part, if you want, like I review in my mind what I want to accomplish, not so much the specifics, but how do I want the flow of my day to go? Right. I'm moving from one thing to the next. I'm feeling energized. I'm feeling in, so basically a general landscape of what I want my day to be. Then, I might ask, I always ask a question at night so that I can, get the input from my subconscious, which is connected to everything. It's my best advisor, right? And so, again, if I'm having a regular dream or whatever, and I'm interpreting it through the lens of that question and only through the lens of that question, that limits the parameters of what my interpretation is going to be. All right. Because if you don't, it's infinite. And people spend a lot of time. That's if you want a quick, here's $1 million tip. That's it. You have the very best advisor of all times. And everybody has it. Everybody can access it. Very few do. Very few do. You have an advisor that has every answer to every question ever posed in humanity, every one. And so why would you not take advantage of that advisor? Because it's difficult to establish. Look, if somebody brought a guy to your house and said, or girl, I don't care, here's a person that has all the answers to every piece of information, every question that's ever been posed by humanity, but they don't speak your language, but they're willing to work for you every day exclusively to answer any question you might have. They're 100% accurate, but the inaccuracies come from not knowing that language. Would you be willing to spend a certain amount of time every day to, engage that person and learn their language? I don't know a single person that is a thinking person that wouldn't take that seriously. I mean, just think about it. You have access to every correct answer of any question you have. Why would you, if it took you 10 years to develop the language, why wouldn't you spend the time to do that? There's nothing that I could think of that would be better than, an effort in that direction.
That's right? Your subconscious, and that can be
your subconscious. Yeah.
And so anyway, every night. Yeah.
That's right. And, I mean, I'm diverging a little bit from the original question, but it's like, so I take advantage of that every night. And so I end up in the morning with, a dream or whatever. And then I'm, analyzing it through the lens of my question so that I have a limited format that I can look at it, a lens that I can look at that through instead of the infinite lens of what it has access to. Right. And I'm not spending all my time trying to guess what it means, it's asinine, but that simple fact is not being, presented. It's like you have to find, the only reason that there's just so many ways to look at the same phenomena, right? We have to limit. We're limited, right? We're limited physically, right? We're limited mentally, emotionally, until we expand those limits. Those are all unknown things to us, and we have to engage it in the right way, right? Or the wrong way, and we still get information back, right? The feedback loop is pretty dramatic. It can be a nice, easy transition, or it can be a punch in the face, right? So, but we're constantly engaging that, right? So hopefully, and so anyway, when I once I'm done with that part, I go to um, you know I go to my list, right? Here's, and usually this is how I do it. One major thing that I need to do today. That's it. One major thing that I need to accomplish today. Whether it's dealing with some company, whether it's dealing with the bank, whether it's dealing with whatever it is, one thing, it's at the top of my list. Here is, if everything else goes to hell in a handbasket, here's the one thing I absolutely have to accomplish today. And then I list all the other stuff that's in my head, stuff from my previous list that didn't get done. That takes priority and goes to the top of the list, and and the list gets written out. But I do this every day. It's like, I don't look back at my list from yesterday and go like, oh Jesus, I only got 3 things done and I've got 25 things on my list, and you're putting your energy in the wrong thing. That's a never-ending list. If you get to the end of your list and there's nothing else for you to achieve, you're dead. You might as well be, right? So it's like, this is the thing. It's, having the correct understanding first and foremost. The list will never end. So then you can relax. Don't make it so frantic that you got to finish your list every day. Why? There's going to be another list tomorrow. That's like, you're putting your anxiety in the wrong place.
But it reminds me of like one of the things that I think about is like if I'm thinking about like kind of the benefits of the practices and the work that we do, that it's like at the end of the day, like regardless of what types of experiences you have or the ways that you, I guess it would just be, whatever experiences you have, it's like the thing that I always appreciate about you that I feel like is hard to translate into a Zoom call or a podcast or a post on social media or whatever, but that I think, at least from my perspective, I want to like address is like that being around you in person, one of the things that comes across so strongly is this metaphor that you always share about, your life experience being much like, you always liken it to a river, right? And I always think of you as like this kind of like super elegant swimmer, where it's just like, he's always like, it's like, I don't know. It's like, it's so hard to describe, but it's like, there's this balance of like, I see you being like, a majority of the time, it's like you're just like, you're super relaxed and just like engaged with, like hyper engaged with whatever's in front of you at the moment. Um, you know, very like light-hearted in general, but also can be like super aggressive if you need to be, like to deal with like a situation or something that maybe needs to be dealt with, or a person that needs that kind of tone in response to their question or their whatever they're dealing with or whatever. It's like knowing, it's like you seem to have this balance of like an enormous like sensitivity to your environment, the people that you engage, what's actually going on with them when you're engaging them, and like the state of energy that they're in and where they're coming from and what they need. But then also this masterful ability to like manipulate your own energy and your responses to them in a way that seems to produce a tremendous amount of just like flow, which is very cool. And it's one of those things that I feel like if you're a sensitive person, like you would sense and admire about you as a practitioner, like not even just a practitioner, like a person, like if they didn't even know what you were up to, like the things that you did, I think they'd just be like, oh wow, like that guy, like what?
Well, first I'll say thank you.
Yeah,
And
I don't mean to like just shower you with praise. It's not really that. It's more
no.
my point in like kind of even saying that, like if we decide to put this out there as a conversation or whatever for people to hear, it's like I feel like my part of what I want to be able to do better with the everything that we put out there from the 2BSilent perspective is like that I can help in some way to um because for like my experience of you, right, was like we met, engaged in like ceremony in the Amazon. So
Mhm.
like there was that. I'm in like a hypersensitive state when I met you. And so a lot of the things that are unsaid or unseen come through. So it's like, okay, you can kind of, I was in a place where I could like really recognize like, oh, this person might have something to offer me or be be represented. Like for me, like with art, it's like I can just look at somebody's work online and decide if I want to learn from them or work with
Yep.
them or whatever, or see their book.
Sure.
It's like it's right there. It's like, are they making the paintings that I want to make? And I feel like I had the opportunity to do that with you. Like I was physically present. I was, being able to see you and feel what it was like to be with you in person and hear the, you know, just not just the qualities of the things that you said, but also like see how you move through the world and what you say, and just be like, oh, like that's how I would like to be able to model that. Like that's, there's a magnetism there when you know that that person has what you want to be able to learn or embody. So I feel like I just struggle with that sometimes. Like how can I represent that so that the people that are like me in that way that would want to learn from you, because I feel like you have so much to teach, that they'd be able to like have the opportunity to see that, so
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult, right? I mean, that's sort of I would say, the primary difficulty with these types of programs or this type of information. Until people put it into practice, it's all just information, right? And we're in an information glut where it's like there's so much information, it's hard to you know uh, differentiate from what's going to be helpful for you and what's not, what's just going to clog up the works even more, right? So for me, there's always been that. And again, not because I'm inherently some kind of genius. It was really just because I think somehow I attracted, with my questioning of myself and the world from a young age, I ended up attracting um, teachers who were harsh and and very utilitarian. It doesn't take away from the nature of their esoteric training or their ability in the woo woo, if you will, to use the colloquial vernacular, right? Bleh. Colloquial.
you got it, man.
Yeah. I vernacular.
Yeah.
So it's like that's one of my goals, is to articulate more clearly. It's like that's one of the things with having less contact with people over the last year, that it's like verbal skills have plummeted. um so anyway, uh yeah, I feel like I really, even though and here's the funny part, right? I really didn't want that. I mean, I wanted the you know the fantastical woo woo scenarios. I mean, that's what I mean, as a kid, not knowing, it's like that was my, I don't want to say my whole world, because I had a pretty basic upbringing, good. No super duper traumas or anything like that. Other than the ones I made up in my head, like every other kid, right? So, but I had a good enough background to sort of, get through those in a way that, that weren't scarring in any way that I could think of. So, but I think that not knowing and thinking that, as a kid, again, anything that instead of the internet, thank God we didn't have it back then, but like books and articles and anything I could get my hands on, and that it was all, if you were reading it, there was some level of truth to it, not being taught how to discern from one thing to another. And so a lot of us grow up that way. I know I grew up that way. And
Well, that's such a good
I was
point
an
too.
avid reader. I was an avid reader. So it's like, and I had nobody to correct me. So I could just engage the stuff and say, like, oh, well, just having that bit of information. And I was willing to experiment with that. Like, just
Right.
I wasn't like, back then we were, more self-sufficient, I feel, like, again, looking at it today, even looking at it from my own kids, it's like, I think one of the reasons that they're all doing well in the world is because, we made them self-sufficient. It's like we push them to be self-sufficient, to figure out things, with guidance, obviously, but to, ask the hard questions, and do some self-examination, and don't put it on other people to do for you. It's like, ask for help when you need it, or instruction when you need it. But then, before you ask difficult questions, try to do the goddamn thing on your own. And it's like, and then if you're not hitting the mark, well, then you ask for nuanced questions, and how do I do this? And how do I do that? It's like, doing and failing is not a fucking waste of time. It gives you some limitations. It gives you some box to say, like, okay, now I know what's known. I can't do this, or I haven't been able to hit the mark. And I know what and then I know that everything outside of that to make me get to my target is something that's unknown to me. So I have to ask questions about the unknown, or sort of send my perception out into those territories and try to get some information back so that I can adjust myself. Not that the target's going to keep jumping in front of me to, I think it's so ass backwards these days. Everybody expects the target's going to, no matter, they could shoot anywhere, eyes closed, eyes open, in the dark, whatever. And they expect the target to move in front of it so they get a bullseye every time. It's like, no, you have to adapt yourself to the situation. Right. And so for me, coming back to the list, that's how I limit my scope for the day. Do I have a list that's a bazillion items long? Of course. Who doesn't? Right? Who doesn't? But it's like, I have to limit the scope. And then, so I put down all these little things, and then, one major thing, all these little things. And then I group them. I just write them. That's, taken from the old list and writing them down.
And it's interesting because this is coming from the guy who, like, in regards to what you're talking about just previous to that, about like being a kid and like, or reading things and not knowing like what's real or what's not real. I mean, you're the guy that like read Castaneda and things like that, let's say, and that's kind of what you meant by like the fantastical. Like, you wanted to experience those things, like live in that environment. And so you like,
and I was 100% convinced that was something that was attainable.
Is it?
Whether it was just a fantasy in my head, or whether it was, something deeper within me that I had no name for, that I could, that kept coming up and putting it in front of me and putting it in front of me and putting it in front of me. And to the point where it was like, I'm going to, as a kid, even, I was like, I'm going to engage this. Now, obviously, I didn't have the means or the wherewithal to, go and find peyote or whatever and do that and, have that experience as a, 12-year-old or whatever. But anything that was, a technique, that was even cursory, in a cursory way, given in the books, I would engage it. And then when I would engage it, I would fail. Right. And then I would have some phenomena. happen, right? And so then, but my mind was like, well, I was constantly setting up the new goal. I want to get to here. Here's where I am not hitting the mark. Here's where I want to be hitting the mark. How do I maneuver a step closer and closer to get to that point? And so I didn't have anybody to tell me, like, oh, you can't do this or you can't do that, or this is dangerous and that's not dangerous, and go about it this way. It's just, it was happenstance, and it was, I was using my own internal compass to do that, and looking at other pieces of information. And you got to remember, I grew up in a, literally 7 miles from where I live right now, and it's an outpost. I'm not kidding. I mean, it's like the biggest town around here is 35,000 people. Okay. So, and I lived in a town that was probably not even 1,000 people. So, all combined, and very rural and very limited as far as education, information, a school library. That's what I had access to, so, and then any kind of books that I could get, from anybody that I could think of that might have something that was of interest to me. And so, and then using that information and sort of using my own self questioning and my own self-assurance that I could probably modify. If I did this to this technique, would it make it any better? Would it make it worse? Would it throw me into this place that I want to be, or not? Or would it take me further from that? Were there things that were too difficult for me? Were the things that were too, like I just couldn't sustain the practice or whatever, like, was there something that was actually harmful to me? Did I ever feel that? It's like all of those things. And so I think, and it's just my own interpretation of, I'm willing to think that, I mean, actually, I'm not willing to think that the teachers that I acquired were happenstance. I just, I don't believe in coincidence. So it's like, it's just, I feel like as a young person, I was asking those questions so often and trying to glean my own answers that I attracted teachers that were hardcore in that territory their whole lives and were extremely rough in their utilitarian, not just methodology, but also application, right? It's like, if it didn't have practical benefit, it didn't mean there wasn't anything to it. It just meant, like, until you can do things that will help your life on a day-to-day basis, there's no reason to go to these, completely esoteric, fantasy lands, which are very accessible. But what do they actually do for you day to day besides give you maybe a mental break, make you long for that even more or whatever? So, their focus was definitely on what can you use every day that will make your life better this day? And so that's the way I learned it. And it was a long process. It wasn't anything that was, and it didn't mean that I just stopped desiring those states. It just meant I knew that if I wanted to get to that state without just tripping into it, and
states like
those
seeing or
much,
lucid dreaming
all of that,
or contact with, non-physical beings and things like that. Like,
right. All of that. So it's like, until I could really utilize the things. And so I made it like, if you want this, then you need to go, if you want to be Mr. America, you've got to do weightlifting a lot.
Well,
right.
It's really interesting that you say that, because like I would say, for me, like personally in my practice, like I constantly feel like, oh, I'm like not having enough of the experiences that I want to with enough regularity or whatever. But then like I do reflect and I think back on like things that I have succeeded at. And I think, you always make the point that we're harder on ourselves than like any teacher would be. And so like, that's definitely true, because we're like, oh, like you always think it's like, I want to be like, if we're just using Castaneda as an example, right? It's like, I want to, like you said, it's like I think, at least for me, like I'm drawn to this work in a lot of ways, for probably the same, in many of the same ways that you were, which is like you said, you want the fantastical. But and then when I reflect on how, like, the things that have changed for me in my life from the work that you've taught me and the ways that you've approached it or taught me to approach it, like so much of that has been making my daily life like so much better. like
Well,
and like
because, right,
it's
it's
like
like
it's so
even Buddha said, and I'm sure I'm paraphrasing this, maybe even incorrectly, but I remember one of my teachers saying, even Buddha said, it's hard to be spiritual when you're hungry.
yeah.
So it's like, take care of your daily existence, and then you can think loftier thoughts. You can, it's not that you just put them on the back burner forever, right? You have certain times you set aside, daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, that you set aside for those, to not to balance out the limitations that you impose on yourself to have a better life day to day, right? Otherwise, it doesn't work, right? It's like, if your spirituality, if your practice doesn't make your daily life better, then it's not worth your time. That's what I
And
would say. And
yeah.
I would
And
stick to that no matter what, like, because,
so as a
you know,
young person that was like seeking out the fantastical, but then
mm-hmm,
finding teachers that were like brutally practical, um, I don't know, maybe you
right.
can talk a little bit about that, because it is an interesting balance. Like we're talking about, Castaneda, fantastic experience, other dimensions, like whatever name you want to put on it, like
Yeah, 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 yeah.
whatever label you come at it from, whatever picture you paint in your mind of what that will look like or what your experiences will be in that place. Like to me, you're the guy that like navigates that territory at will, essentially. But also you're the guy that's telling me about like making a list for my day. And like, yeah, so there's I just it's
It's a
interesting to me
balance,
that you
right?
have this like you there it's almost like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that like your extreme attention to like the practicality and managing life and dealing with all of the aspects of physicality extremely proficiently kind of go hand in hand with like the ability to put your mind into these more expansive places or engage the invisible, right? But and have that like work out well.
Yeah, but it should be really, I think it would be really important for people to understand why that is. Why is that? Is it just this, incredible, perfect balance, which, there's really no such thing, right? It's constantly moving, or else it's not balance anymore. Now you're just a rock on the ground, right? So you don't need balance to be a rock on the ground, right? So it's like, balance is that's a dynamic thing. It's a spring, right? It's like, you take a spring and it doesn't move, right? And that's just a curly Q piece of metal, right? It's like a spring indicates movement, right? There's some kind of movement there. So, what is it about balancing those two things? It's not that difficult an idea to grasp, right? When you have a life that's relatively good, settled in your way, doesn't mean you don't have things going on or whatever, but that you have ways to, constantly produce, a good effect in your life from the causes that you've instigated, right? You've done this, and this becomes apparently the effect, right? It's like, you say these things, good things happen to you later. You engage somebody in a great way, they're going to engage you in a great way, right? So it's like, there's always this cause and effect. It's a principle of the universe, right? There's cause and there's an effect from everything that we do, every word that we utter, everything that we take action on. And so, but what gets us to take these, bigger leaps, right, with confidence, I mean, the thing is, when you jump into the unknown, the only place the only thing that you have as a reference point is yourself. But, in a way, what gives you the confidence to go into that? What gives you the confidence to go into the unknown, since the unknown is the thing that most human beings are hardwired to avoid, right? We like the comfortable, we like the familiar, right? Family, we understand, at least to some degree, all the aspects of those other people and places, right? It's like when we get thrown into some place that we have no idea where we are, what's going on, who these people are, anything like that, that promotes, an incredible amount of anxiety to the point of panic, right? And that's why people, just putting a toe inside this unknown usually sends them shrieking back to where they came from, right? Under their bed. So it's like,
So you
what
think it's like a
gives you the
tolerance?
confidence? Not just that, but what gives you the initial, part and the ability to, I don't want to, yeah, I'm
I
just
just
going to
mean
say
like,
freely move into that space on a regular basis. Well, if I were going to go spelunking, you don't do that free form, right? You don't go by yourself if you're smart, right? So you have somebody that's always anchoring you, or climbing a rock, right? Big high rock face. Yeah, you're proficient, but you've got some, you've got a harness on, you've got a rope on, again, except for some people that are just kooky that don't do that, right? And they're anchored, right? So that if you do make a mistake, you're confident that that's going to hold you. Now, some people, they're shaking to take one, in a rock gym where everything is extremely structured and very safe. They're afraid to even, put a hand up on the next rock 2 feet off the ground, right? Because, they're not confident that their harness is going to hold them, or that the person that's anchoring them is going to be stable, right? They're going to be attentive enough to catch you if you fall, and you're not going to splat on the ground. Okay. So the analogy there is that, a solid life is your anchor. I realized that over time, having, being able to engage those utilitarian aspects to make my life better and more constant, doesn't mean that there aren't any ups and downs, right? Of course there are. That's life. So, but the idea is that my foundation is so solid, it becomes my anchor, right? It becomes my anchor. And that anchor tethers me to this solid foundational place. But the part of my head is that that's not going anywhere. I'm constantly doing stuff to build that up. I'm not waiting for that to be a crumbling wall before I repair it, right? I'm constantly every day inspecting it in one aspect or another and doing something to enhance it, my foundation, because that solid anchor gives me the freedom, the ability to move into the unknown, knowing that, yes, there could be some snafu along the way, but basically that anchor is something that will always draw me back and settle me back into this place, right? Because that's the thing that we're, one of those things that we're most afraid of, or most people with any common sense are afraid of, is that they're going to do a bunch of these esoteric exercises, or, whatever tradition, and that they're going to be injured in a way mentally, not physically, but mentally, in a way that's going to make them not able to participate in their normal everyday life, right? They're going to be so whacked out that they're, that they're going to be like schizoid in some way, right? So they can't sign a check, they can't relate to their kids, they can't do this, they can't do that, so it basically, traps them halfway between those two states, the known and the unknown, right? But that solid anchor, it's like it reels you back in. It gives you so much confidence that you can go farther. That's the thing. And because, and you see, I didn't know this in the beginning. I didn't. I was looking for those farther things, not even understanding that there could be some danger in that. It's like, yeah, I mean, I was I mean, I was scared a lot of the times, or like always questioning, oh, where am I going to do this time? But I think that anticipation actually heightened my, you know, um, my ability to sort of, move into those territories a little bit more. I was always anticipating something fantastical happening, right? And
Yeah.
so, but I didn't know that. I didn't have a right expectation that there was some danger in that, that there was some, underlying things that could happen to me. Like I didn't have that present in my mind that, that I would be, that something could happen that might break me psychically or break me mentally, doing those things. So, and, maybe that's just a weird aspect of me. I don't know for
Well, when
sure,
you're,
but,
it's interesting, like from what I know about you, and you even talked a little bit about your childhood, like spending a lot of time in the woods, growing up like in an extremely rural area, like having a pretty good family life that you grew up in.
Mhm.
Like, I mean, that's essentially what you just described of having like a solid foundation or having like a relatively safe what you felt was a relatively safe existence, which probably facilitated, your ability to engage in those other, types of experiences, even like as a
Right.
young person, right? So, but it's funny
Right.
because
Because
like
one of the
it's the,
first things that you realize, one of the first things you realize is that if you do any type of, let's say, I hate to use, we just don't have good words for these things. People will say stuff like higher level training or, or something to that ilk, and it's just like, it's different. It's just different, right? It's not higher, lower, whatever. It's just different. And so I would think that anything higher would be something that puts you deeper into the unknown than just skirting the edges, right? And putting a toe in and bringing it back and those kinds of things, right? So, sort of accidentally moving into that deeper state of the unknown. But here's the funny part, right? It's like the first thing that happens when you find yourself in that situation are all the doubts and all the things you have not accomplished or are to your satisfaction in your normal everyday.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
the shit that comes up.
Even
It's not
approaching
some
it,
wild,
even approaching
like,
it. Yeah.
right, even approaching it. Those are the things that come up. My inadequacy, my,
Yeah.
non-worthiness.
The
It's
things I
not
said or shouldn't have said.
yeah, it's not the face-eating demon waiting around the corner. It's literally, those are the things that are your own demons, right? Your chaotic forces that immediately when you approach the unknown, it's almost like it's a magnet to them, that draws them out.
Why do
Like,
you think that is?
I think that it's the familiarity of, your daily existence, doing things that have a utilitarian or practical benefit for you in your life, and forming that foundation strong. In some ways, that builds a foundation that's much like it's a limiting factor in some way. It limits what kind of chaos, these things can promote. It also limits the amount of self-sabotage, or what we call self-sabotage, that we call chaotic forces, right? That are unbound within us. The ones that rear their ugly head at the worst possible moment, when you're supposed to say something good and you say something bad, or, whatever, all these little incidents, right? So those are just things that you know, you don't have the right relationship with. You don't ever want to eradicate them, because they're an impetus for change. They have a lot of energy for movement and change, right? They're chaotic.
It
We just want
makes
to bind them so that they're moving in a certain direction that we want to propel ourselves toward, right?
and
Using those, binding them as energy.
and it makes sense that like a good the more stable your life seems to you, the less impact that would have on you. But I was more asking like, why do you think that those aspects of ourselves come out or are drawn to the surface when we begin to approach the unknown, or begin to blur our normal sense of like um, boundaries, and begin to, yeah, like engage any energetic or spiritual or experience of the unknown or the unseen or whatever, like the invisible, like why are they drawn to that? Why would they emerge at that point?
Because it's a weak spot, right? We don't know it. And so imagine you have a house with a great foundation, but the house has become too small. So now you're going to add an addition on instead of looking for a new house, right? You're just going to add on to this existing house. Well, you can get the person that really knows what they're doing and saying, okay, here are the limits that you could do right now, existing, within the structure of your existing house. You're going to have to build this foundation out and, do all these things. And, but, you tend to, there's all these points within it. And everybody that's had any, additions or any kind of construction in their house, it never goes to plan, right? We know this. I mean, this is a utilitarian, constant, right? There's always something that comes up that wasn't, because we can't, look, contractors, no matter how good they are, they can't x-ray your house and say like, oh, Jesus, there's a line there that we didn't know was there before. And so we're just going to go around that and do it. No, they do their best. They have their best ideas about how this is going to function in the most practical way. So, but I think, when you traverse into the unknown to expand your house, your known house, every step of that process has the potential for bringing instability to your existing house. Right? Every step. In fact, it's impossible to do it. I would say it's impossible to do it without having that. But knowing that ahead of time is already 90% of the game, right? Knowing that it's going to make your existing house, or has the potential to make your existing house unstable, is already 98% of the game, right? And so as you move closer to that, and it becomes more and more and more and more unstable, because it's more and more and more and more of the unknown, right? Mm-hmm. So you might dig down, or they may dig down, your contractor, and find out there's just a giant fucking boulder under there and you can't get around it. And there's no way to get deep enough to make the foundation work, right? Or you got to fill it all in and make, you've got to have some other alternatives. And now they're looking for other ways to do it, expand it, right? There's always shit from the very first shovel that goes in the ground. There's always stuff that comes up. And so somewhere along the way, there's going to be something that tells you that, here's another hurdle that you have to choose. Do I go over that, or do I scrap the whole damn thing and just exist within the house that I have? Or do I go out and buy a new house, or whatever it is, right? So, and I think that because those forces within you are chaotic, they're attuned to that chaos, that instability, right? And so the closer you get to that, the more they resonate with that too, and they come more to the surface, right? That's the whole idea. In the opposite idea, it's the same, right? Stability promotes more stability, right? So it's like, I'm in this, familiar territory. A problem comes up. I know what to do. I don't spend a lot of brain power on it. I have an elegant solution that's worked in the past, and I implement that. I know that there's a tiny percentage of things that might go off in that, but 90% of the time it's going to work just lovely, and I'm going to do that. And, I might make it even better along the way if I can, refine it, make it more elegant, more efficient, all of those things. But it's, it promotes more stability. Stability promotes more stability. Chaos promotes more chaos, right? So like speaks to like. It's just another one of those principles, So, we can extend it out to groups, right? It's like, this is the whole reason, people like motivational speakers. This is the reason why people, get thrown into these mob situations and start agreeing with shit that they never would agree with one-on-one. They get wrapped up in the energy of what it is, right? And they get sucked into that vortex. And so all of a sudden they're attuning to that same frequency and not even understanding that it's not a good thing to do, right? It's like they just They become what they're involved with, at the very highest frequency, if we will, so they get entrained to that. And there's almost, it's hard for people to even understand, look, that kind of stuff actually, you entrain to it so dramatically that you don't even understand that you don't fundamentally disagree, that you fundamentally disagree with what's actually being said here, but you're so entrained to that energy, you don't even understand that you disagree with what's fundamentally being said.
Well, that's just it, right? Because as you approach any experience like of the unknown, and let's say that those like internal chaotic aspects come to the surface, it's not that they I mean, in all of my recent experiences of that, it's like it's not that they declare something definitive about, or that they reflect something definitive about you, or like, you know, um, whether it's just like your thoughts about yourself in your own head, that, like as being like a certain way. It's more like there's always this element of like confusion, at least it feels like that, like where it's like, I don't know if I did the right thing or I didn't, or I don't know if I'm in the right or the wrong. I don't, I don't know how I should handle this, or if I should try to correct it, or, whatever. It's always, and I feel like that was really reflected in what you were saying about when you're in a mob or whatever, and you're so swept up in some idea or some motivating emotion that you don't even know that you don't think that anymore. It's not like it's chaos, it's confusion. It's like, I don't know if I'm right, I don't know if I'm wrong, I don't know how to handle this, I don't know what to think, I don't know if my, if I'm thinking sensically about this. And so yeah, I can totally understand that, and what you, even this is like super helpful for me. It makes so much sense. It makes so much sense that as you would start to add another layer to your experience or to your life, or to open yourself up to the unknown, that flexibility, that permeability, that all the things that entails, resonates with the chaotic forces inside you, and all those like concerns and worries and the not knowing, and whatever. So it's just so. But
yeah, and it's
okay,
it's
so but
again, but
but that
go
being
ahead.
said, though, then like, we're in, okay, so 2BSilent, our program largely focuses, at least from the outside looking in, on, all of these things that would help you to experience more of the unknown, or to engage your spirituality in a more active way, both perceptually and as a function of making, changes in your life or whatever. But we're living in one of the most like broadly chaotic times ever, not because like, oh well, there's more or less war or suffering as there has been in other times, but like literally, like the literal term, like there is definitely more. Whatever. Okay, so I've been only around 37 years, and I have a tenuous grasp of all of human history, but it just seems like it's probably one of the most chaotic times. So given that, like we're navigating, like all of us are living in a less stable house than we're used to a certain degree. So why would anyone do this? Why would anyone try to engage these practices, given the current circumstances?
Yeah, I think it's for the same reason. It's a utilitarian reason, as far as I'm concerned. It's and everybody will have their own ideas about this, but the basic idea is that in some way it will help you stabilize your physical existence, right? For right now. And so they start, it's a feedback loop, right? The more I stabilize my physical existence, the more and I have more, relative comfort there, then the more I can explore this other part. When I explore the invisible, then that benefits my practical, my physical existence, right? And so it becomes this, feedback loop, positive feedback loop, right? And so it balances both sides, right? one increases the other stability in the physical, increases the ability to move farther into the unknown, to, now maybe all my questions aren't just how to get a raise, right? Maybe some of my questions is, what the fuck am I doing here? But in the beginning, it doesn't make any sense to ask those questions.
Of your
So
subconscious
again, for me, it was like, I mean, that was, my head was in that area. And, and again, I feel, it wasn't comfortable, but I feel like I was blessed with teachers that were so practical and focused on the utilitarian aspects of this spiritual work that, that I could reap the benefits of that, right? That it was like, over time, they would keep deflecting me from those higher ideals or whatever, to say, like, what practical benefit is that going to give you right now? I just want to know, it's like, that's a child's answer, right? I just want to know, it's like, why do you want to know? They kept pushing me on those things. And so that's where, part of my attitude from here is pushing people on that. Why, what, how, what are you going to do with this once what's the goal, and why do you want it? What do you want? Why do you want it? That's why I use that as, a guiding principle for people to create what they want in their life. What do you want? Even if you're embarrassed, you need to write out what you want. If you want to shit in a gold toilet, I don't give a F about that, right? It's like, what would make that, why is that something you really desire? And it's not to justify to anybody except yourself. What is it? And is that really, a, an answer that's going to like light you up, as opposed to something that's, you're feeling like you're doing it for reasons that maybe you established as a child, or something's unconscious, right? That, hasn't been brought to light, that you're just looking for a certain amount of approval from people or from somebody else or something else, right? And it's like, all of those things are, they're not, in my opinion, they're not worthy, whys. They're not worthy answers to the reason, to the question why, right? It's like, the only thing you need to have approval is, from yourself first, and, to some degree, of course, from the society that you live in, right? It's like, if you want to live in this society, you always have the choice of going somewhere else, right? I mean, even if we don't think, oh, that's impossible, I could never go. No, you could. It would be uncomfortable, but you could do it. It's the unknown again. It's the unknown in this physical dimension, right? I'd much rather live, I don't know where, pick some Croatia, right? It's like, you could sell everything you have, buy a couple of tickets, try to figure out a job or what you're going to do there if you have some skill set that you can use, and move there, right? And find a place and, and set up your life there if that's really what you wanted to do. Yes, it would be uncomfortable. Yes, most of your friends would try to convince you not to do it, because even hearing that idea would be scary to them, so it's like, you're breaking from your society to move into a different one that seems, at least in your mind, suits you better. So the end result being that you'll be more comfortable here, right? And in that comfort of the familiar and building out a life that you want will make you a foundation, an anchor, which you can attach, your, the cord that tethers you, to be able to range into more of the unknown, so that you feel comfortable that you have such a strong anchor that it will haul you back. I always think of that as being, my foundation as being, practically immovable, right? Something between, a giant boulder under the ground to, a combination of that, or an anchor from a tanker ship, there's just like, there's no effing way anybody could move that. I could barely move a link of the chain that holds that down. And so I have no, no misgivings that that's going to hold me and drag me back if I need to. It's like, and that gives me the freedom to explore and to do more and to, in some ways risk more, right? And to be able to engage it in a way that, like, okay, I know this is what I'm doing. Here's my goal. This is what I want to engage. I'm going to go there. I'm going to do my best with what I have, that my understanding at this point, and engage it in the way that I want to. And if it doesn't work, I have at least an understanding of the principles of what we do to maneuver in that territory for a little while, and be relatively unscathed, because you never are completely unscathed when you move into the unknown, right? Because otherwise it wouldn't be unknown, right? So it's like, you're going to get some bumps and bruises, expect it. You're going to get some things, because every time you open up that little avenue into the unknown, things are going to change here as well in your practical. That's why I said, to bring it all the way back to the beginning, is that, if your spiritual work or your energetic work or anything you want to put that heading under, if it's not enhancing your physical environment, if it's not helping your family, if it's not, helping you out, helping you sleep better, helping you eat better, helping you, function at work better, all of those practical things that become your foundation. If it's not helping you do that on a day-to-day basis, then, in my opinion, it's not worth shit. Because I don't believe that, you're suffering completely here so that you can have some heavenly, existence once you leave here. That's not my belief. So no offense to anybody who that is their belief. I'm just saying, it's like, that seems like a pretty, in my way of thinking, that seems like a pretty, sort of hands-off approach to life, right? Like, as long as I'm a good doobie, I get my reward at the end. No matter how much crap I take during the time, how much suffering I have, how much whatever, as long as I fall under these principles, as long as I fall under these precepts and do that, then I'm going to be like, I'll be 100% at the end. It's like, no, to me, that's not, that seems like a very destiny kind of, type of scenario, which I've not seen that pan out. We've not had anybody come back and say, if a bunch of people came back and said, like, hey, it's actually just like that, it's like, okay, well, then I guess we'll all suffer and try to be good, which will reduce the suffering in general. We'll all try to be really good because we want to get to that spot where it's infinitely great, so in the meantime, I'm trying to make it infinitely great here, right now, right? My engagement of, with me in my car, turning the key, having it start, consistently, getting to work in a safe fashion, avoiding crashing into other things on the way. It's like, all of those things to me are victories. We just don't think of them as victories anymore. It's like, we just think of it as that's how it should be. No, people are driving 5,000 to 6,000 pound missiles next to each other every day. A missile
Right.
behind you, a missile next to you, a missile in front of you, and you're driving a missile too. I don't understand why we're not all dead. It's like,
Totally.
it's freaking ridiculous, and yet
Yeah.
we take it for granted that we're just going to get in and, unconsciously go and do, and no big deal, and, whoa, and we're surprised when it happens, and I'm like, why I'm more surprised every day that it doesn't happen.
So coming back to you as a little kid, like, do you feel like the young you that was, or whatever age you were at when you were reading Castaneda and things like that, do you feel like those those longings, those expectations of how your engagement with the invisible could be like, do you feel like those have been realized?
I mean, a lot of them have, you know,
Because that's one of those things about
it
like all
doesn't
those
mean that
books is like
right.
people
Yeah.
question like, is it real or was it fiction, or how much of it was real? I mean, I get that may be a deeper question for another conversation, but you
I
know.
mean, I think that a lot of it was real to, his perceptual states. I mean, I've done it's here's the other thing is that a lot of the practices that were in those books were not, I mean, they were idiosyncratically, you know, skewed to him and that tradition, right? But
Yeah.
a lot of them, those same practices are utilized in many traditions. And I found them, that's where I filled in the blanks. Once I started really having like training,
Mm.
where it was like, do this, do this, do this, and then you get here and then do this. And then, um, I could fill in the blanks through experience, through experimenting. It's like, oh, here's a part that was left out. What if I add that in to the same practice, but knowing what I know now, add this in, right? Like relaxation, my flagship thing that I'm constantly waving in front of people, right? It's like 3 deep breaths does not constitute relaxation, right?
Yeah. I
It's
guess I
like
just mean from like an experiential standpoint, do you feel like at least that many of the things that he wrote about are possible,
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
and that through the things that you've done and engaged, that you've been able to prove that out for yourself?
Yep. Not everything, but many. And other things that he didn't write about that,
Right.
I learned from other traditions and stuff that I figured out on my own
Mm.
because after, 40 something years of official, like having a teacher type of training, and having that same mind of, understanding that, I have questions. And so, and, having enough information that I can engage these relatively safely. There's nothing that's 100% safe, right? But relatively safely being able to engage it and figure it out one step at a time. So there are things that I've done that I don't, I'm not going to say that nobody else has done. I'm just going to say that I didn't learn point by point from one of my teachers. It was like combinations that I put together that produced a certain result for myself that I could consistently reproduce. For me, that's always a big thing is that, a one-off phenomena is not the same thing as something you can reproduce over and over and over again.
Right.
That's sort of the mark of a professional rather than somebody who's just a weekend warrior or whatever. The one-off phenomena, the week-long retreat, the weekend retreat, the tiny amount of training or whatever, the one-off ayahuasca or psilocybin experience, the one-off LSD experience, all of those things, that's not the same as being able to reproduce the scenario over and over and over again with consistent results or building the results up as time goes on, right?
Yeah.
So that's the difference, but that's time, right? And experience level. And, again, you can't look, nobody shows it's very, like, here's the thing with our, informational platform, whatever, like the internet as a general informational platform, it's like people don't naturally, um, they don't present the opposite of what they're offering, right? Like you don't say like, I'm going to teach you how to be Mr. America. And they show a 90-pound weakling, you know, you know, struggling to just, skin and bones, right? It's like, that's not the end result people are looking for. We're visual creatures, right? It's like, well, how do you represent without, you know, a turban, flowing robes, or the goatee with a black Mandarin collar. How do you represent, you know, let's say, some kind of expertise in, energetic functionality? It's like, how do you do that? It's like a business guy can show his bank account. He can show how many businesses he's helped acquire the same. He can show all the people that he's gotten to $1 million platform. The same thing with a bodybuilder or whatever. They can show all the guys and all the trophies and all these things. That's fine. But, how does somebody, present themselves that, has experience, has produced what I would consider a good life, and a functional relationship with those energetic ideas. How do you represent that, even if it can't be,
You get some guy
even,
like me asking some guy like you questions on a podcast.
yeah, that's it. Exactly. So it's like these snippets of information, it's like, look, it's a long process. It's anybody that tells you that it's not is bullshitting you. It's like,
Yeah.
that's the bottom line. Anybody that says you're going to get some kind of enlightenment in a year, is like, that's just, your bullshit meter's got to be running at like 110% at that point. Like, run away fast. Don't give any of your information. It's like, this is not going to happen. So, but can you do something even in a week? Yes. Something practical? Yes. Is it too late to start? No. It's like, but the idea is that you're always grounding it in, what's your experience. Look, I've heard Joe Rogan say 1 million times, like, why do I smoke cannabis on a regular basis? A lot, because it makes me practically a nicer human being. It's like, and we all know, I mean, he has his opinions and whatever. I think he's a great guy. It's like, I don't know him personally, but it's like, I think this is great. But he can be, I mean, he's a comedian, right? He's crass, or can be. It's like, he can be this, he can be that. That's all like no big deal. But he's recognized in himself that doing that regularly makes him a better family man, nicer with his kids, better with people, keeps his curiosity high. It's like, there's all of these things that he's engaged in, that this happens, he feels. And we haven't heard from his wife for his kids, which is probably a really good thing, not meaning that they would have something opposite to say about that, but just to keep them out of the limelight, right? It's probably good that he doesn't put them on in that place. But I mean, he also strikes me as being a very honest person. So why would he? It's not just to justify some kind of habit. It's like, literally, he believes that has made him a much better person. Okay. So that's a practical benefit from that, what I would consider a pretty small, thing, so, it's one of those things where I think about this stuff the same way. It's like, if it doesn't have an immediate impact, or pretty quickly an impact on your physical existence in one way or another, then it's not worth it, because there's a lot of time that has to be spent there, and you got to find one that's sort of already,
what do you mean by a lot of time that has to be spent there?
Well, there's a lot of time that has to be spent in, sort of that step-by-step training of, like, whether it's breathing or starting from there, meditating, relaxation. There's all these places where, in order to get those higher level experiences, if we want to call it that again, without putting a label on it, there's a lot that goes into that, to be able to maneuver in that territory comfortably, or maybe not even comfortably, maybe that's too far,
Proficiently.
Yeah, proficiently. That's the best word for that, you know. And so I I think that that's the best thing. But you know, again, I think that's the true, you know, the true my true understanding of that idea that the journey is more than the destination is just that. I think they're equal, but that the journey, you know, is the practical benefits every day that you acquire from doing the practices that build you up to getting closer to your destination.
Mm.
You're getting adequate benefit from both. It's just that one is right here, right now. The other one is later, you know, a little bit later. You know, you'll enter into those places if done right. You'll enter into those places automatically. You know, you'll instigate them and you'll have those experiences and you'll recognize them for what they are. You know, and so then you're able to use your energy to maneuver around within them, you know. And so and in the beginning you'd be, you know, almost remiss if your questions weren't around how do I make my life and the people around me life better right now,
Yeah.
you know, in my opinion, rather than
Yeah.
those giant questions that are just so open-ended. It's like, what is that going to do for you right now?
Yeah.
How do you have to get rid of your family and your friends and your possessions and move to Tibet and live in a cave until you die, you know, and then you're enlightened instantly, you know? So it's like, you know, I mean, I'm not saying there aren't ways to do it, and there probably are ways, and I'm making a little bit of fun there, obviously, but the idea is that, you know, why is it that we don't use, or most people don't use their spirituality as a practical tool for, you know, a better physical existence?
Yeah.
You know, that's the real question. And that's the question that I'm always trying to uh, address with people. That's the whole reason for this program, right? Everything I do, it's like, yeah, I mean, I could probably banter with the best about the, you know, whatever levels of this existence or that. It's all, you know, until you've engaged it, it's all just hoo-ha, you know. It's like, but you know, but as far as like always trying to ground it in some practicality here and now, I mean, that's, you know, what I really want to engage people on, because once they feel that, it's such the opposite idea, right? Once they have that and they really feel that, they're going to feel so comfortable to kind of go beyond that if they want to. And for some people, that's all they want, is just, you know, the ability to really manifest a great physical life here and now, great for their kids, great for their wife, great for their husband, great, you know, for everybody around them, their community, right? They want to ground it in some kind of practicality. And you know, I champion that. But for those few people that are using that as an anchor, building an anchor so that they can explore even more, you know, and get to those bigger questions, you know, the more, you know, lofty questions, then, you know, it's the same avenue to get there. It's just that once you get there and that comfort level in your physical environment becomes much better, that gives you a little bit more tether in, right? And so it's again that positive feedback loop that keeps feeding back into that, making the foundation better, making you more stable. You know, nobody's jumping off a 2,000-foot cliff with a perfect harness, a perfect thick rope, but the guy who's holding you is 90 pounds.
Right. Yeah.
Nobody's doing that with comfort.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So, you know, that's not happening.
Yeah.
So, you know, everything should add to that foundational aspect so that you feel so comfortable, that you have such a good, strong, you know, attachment, you know, and foundational to, you know, to this place, that it frees you up to do that, you know? So,
Yeah. Cool. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up the conversation for today, at least from the podcasting perspective.
yeah,
And yeah, I mean, I would encourage anybody that enjoyed the conversation to go to our website to learn more about the program that we offer. And
absolutely.
do you have anything you want to say about that? I mean, there are a couple of places where I was thinking, when you were talking about like one-off workshops versus what we do and how we've structured the delivery of the program to make it, like affordable, but also be able to provide as much, feedback and contact and things like that. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, if there's anything you want to say about that.
I mean, the programs, again, they give you, the individual programs within the membership, right? You have access to everything. So it's like, but the individual programs are just different avenues to sort of come at the same thing, right? So whether it's, lucid dreaming, whether it's seeing energy, whether it's contact, I mean, they all kind of move toward contact in a general way, flavor, right? And so, and then, the people that want to take the maximum advantage of that, and they should, they're paying money, I mean, it is very reasonable, but they're still paying something. It's something from them. It's not, again, it's not nothing, right? It's not some free thing that there's, there's no perceived value there, right? They're paying something. And so they have to put in their even more value because it's their time, right? They actually have to do the practices. But here's the thing. One thing that differentiates us is that we've made it so reasonable that I can't think of very many people that can't do it. There's always going to be that tiny percentage, but if that's a goal, they'll manage it somehow. The other thing is that, the practical benefits of the course isn't the course material. It's the feedback from us and from the other members that have already gone through that part. And the idea that there's a community building out there, that, we're using our collective information and our collective experiences to help cut the learning curve down for anybody who wants to engage those. Whether you ignore me completely and just want to go into the the great beyond or whatever and find out ridiculous, information about things that are just whatever you think, right? Or whether you want to really take it to that practical level, the whole idea is that, the feedback of information cuts your learning curve down. You don't have to spend 20 years in a cave or an ashram someplace, right? It's like, you don't have to go and live in the jungle. You don't have to do any of those things. You can do it here, which already should, if you can take it out of the context of what other people think, that if it's not foreign, if it's not your culture, then it's better. It's like, no, that's not the case. All I'm saying is I've done those things. I've done them for a long time. And I'm willing to give you the information about what you ask about, right? To cut the learning curve down. You're going to do the practices. It's only if you do the practices that you have any value for question. Because everybody can, it's simple enough that everybody can go through those things step by step and do their own thing, right? Step by step, follow the directions. We've spent a long time making them very explicit. But the real value comes from the interaction, because a book or a tape or anything, now I'm dating myself, right? Some digital format is not going to answer your questions that are individual to you. I did this breathing practice and here's what happened. How do I make it better? Or, man, I got a horrible headache. How do I, is that what it's supposed to do? It's like, no, but you wouldn't have that question if you didn't do the practice. And that's the thing. I'm not saying that books and videos and whatever don't have value. I'm just saying the value in them is to instigate some understanding on your part and some desire to apply it.
Yeah.
But then it ends there. It ends there.
Yeah.
unless for some unknown reason you accidentally do everything right and are propelled into that place. But then you have the added problem of, how do I maneuver in this place?
Yeah. I mean, here's the
So
thing. It's like yeah, it I think it's partly for, part of what it is for us, like our congruency with doing this at this point is like making you available to answer those questions and give feedback on experiences. So, I mean, literally, I mean, I've been doing this stuff with you for over 10 years, and I got a lot of value out of this conversation from my own practice. It put a lot of things into perspective for me. And like the fact that that's still happening, even when we sit down to like have a conversation for our podcast or whatever, is that's amazing to me. Like, and it just goes to show that like no matter how much information that you have or techniques that like that that interaction and getting feedback from someone that has been where you want to go and is kind of swimming in those waters all the time is like there's like no replacement for that as far as I can tell.
no, yeah, and I mean, and granted, everybody's going to be doing that at their own level because they're all evolving, they're all changing, right? Every
Right.
time you do a practice, you change your energetic configuration, you enhance it
Right.
in some way, dissipate others, it's
Yeah.
constantly changing. So your the lens that you're asking and trying to receive your answers, asking questions and receiving answers from them, is going to be, through that lens, right? So, and that lens is constantly changing as you do more practices. So that's another feedback loop, right? So the idea is, what I'm constantly trying to do is refine my answers down to get the person who's asking them a little bit, one step closer to their goal, whatever that is, and it may sound sometimes like I'm telling them to go backwards, because I am. If they've skipped a step or whatever, it becomes very apparent in a system. It becomes very apparent when a step has been avoided or skipped over or just by mistake. How many times on our calls has somebody described, that they weren't getting something out of a certain practice, and I'd asked them to describe the practice and found out that they missed a whole step? Just something simple. I mean, literally so simple. It took me 3 sentences to explain, what the step was that they were missing and why it's important. And they'd go away and they'd do it for a few weeks. They'd come back and they'd say, holy shit, I've been doing this for a year incorrectly because I thought it was correct, but I just went ahead and I wasn't producing results. And just in that little, as soon as I started to apply that one step, it changed everything. It was night and day. That happens all the time.
It's
Not
so
just
interesting.
not just with me. It's not
Yeah.
it's not me. I'm not so super. The idea is that it happens with everybody, but you have to be able to have a resource to ask that question.
It's so interesting too to me, like that. Like I was just watching this Sadhguru video, and he was talking about how we don't like English does not have the same vocabulary as other languages in terms of describing inner experiences or
Correct.
experiences of the spiritual or energetic. Like literally our language is limited in that range. And yeah, I wonder if a lot of what we're doing and the value of these ongoing conversations, both publicly and within just our membership with members, is like it's like part of our struggle as Western people to engage these experiences is that like we weren't raised with a language that we can utilize to name and navigate those spaces. So when we have an experience, it's like we're first of all struggling to articulate it, and then you have your challenge of also articulating back to us, like and that's why I feel like a lot of the that's why it's almost like if an energetic program is in English, it's almost automatically limited in its immediate efficacy without some kind of conversation to support its application, just because our culture hasn't been steeped in that for long
No.
enough to be able to, do do that
And
efficiently.
without being a native speaker, that's the other thing.
Of other languages.
Culture is wrapped up in the language, right? It's
Right.
like they understand the fine nuance of these words, these phrases, these concepts.
Yeah.
Not just from their guru, right? It's from their grandmother and their mother and father and their siblings and, uncles and aunts that have done other things in that territory, right? It's like they get all this information, and it's the guru's job to, sort of bring some semblance of organization and limitation on what it is that they're doing, right? They're creating a sacred space for them to occupy for a period of time to experience that and then expand that out, right? To move to the next step. And so, that's why we have to, for our language and our culture and our, all of these things, and the lack of that being around for so long, we're reinventing that, right? I try not to use any of those catchphrases. I try not to use any of them unless unless there's no better alternative, and then I'm explaining exactly what it means,
Right.
to my knowledge, right?
Sure.
So, but that's why I have to use so many analogies. That's why I have to use so many metaphors. I can't just say, "Oh, this is gobbledygook," and that's why it's that way. It's like, and everybody's supposed to know, because if it's in my culture, well, gobbledygook means exactly this thing, right? It's like, but nobody knows what the hell that means. So I can't just say, namaste, right? It's like, Jesus Christ. Well, okay. I kind of know that's a greeting, it's something yoga people say. It's something hippies make fun of. It's something, like it's just, it's one of those things, right? There's all these questions. And so, that's why I'm always trying to, and again, not that I'm so brilliant, right? It's like I had teachers that did that. They forced me to, and they forced themselves to translate foreign concepts and words into English through analogy and metaphor, so that I could get what it was in essence that they were talking about, so that I could utilize it. That's the important thing. And that's, and that is it's a way, I think, at least for me, I mean, that's, added difficulty to the situation. I can't just speak one word to one word understanding wise, right? It's like I have to explain these concepts. I have to explain what's going on with that, give it analogy. It's and it's one of the reasons that I appreciate people like Sadhguru, right? Because it's like I don't practice that tradition, but the concepts are the same that I've heard from the traditions that I have practiced. Just he explains it through analogy and metaphor, because not everybody is Indian, right? So it's like, and I've just, again, I find it fascinating that I've attracted in one shape or form to myself those people that are very, very good at doing that. And I'm learning from them. That's, I'm assuming their role, when I do these things, to try to access that information and make it more understandable for people. Because the more people actually understand what it is that they're doing, why they're doing it, and not afraid to, actually state their goal, even to themselves, of what they want and why they want it, then, it's, then I think it's, if them understanding that brings them closer to that, then I feel really good about being able to do that for them. Have them understand, at least on a cursory level, these loftier concepts, and how to take that and drive it home with a practical benefit in your everyday life. To me, that's the great value of this, so.
Well, thanks, man. Anybody listening to the podcast and enjoying it, you can just go to 2BSilent.com or send us an email if you have any questions at 2BSilent@2BSilent.com. And thanks for laying down this podcast with me today, Brian. And I enjoyed it tremendously, and I'm looking forward to the next one. So
Awesome.
thanks.
Sounds great.
See you later.
See you, man.